A population with limited resources, it shows a lag phase initially, followed by phases of acceleration and deceleration, and finally asymptote when the population density reaches the carrying capacity. This type of population growth is called as Verhulst-Perl logistic growth. So this is the diagram which represents the Verhulst-Perl logistic growth. So here in this graph you can see the y-axis represents the size of the population and the x-axis represents the time. So initially the population shows the lag phase where the growth of the population has just begun. Then it is followed by the phase of acceleration where the exponential growth of population happens, leading to the deceleration. Here the growth of the population starts to slow down, finally leading to asymptote, which is the carrying capacity of the nature. Otherwise it is also called as stable equilibrium phase. So this is the Verhulst-Perl logistic growth, and this curve is obtained when the resources are limited in nature. And this is the equation of the logistic growth model. It is represented by dn by dt is equal to Rn k minus n by k, where n is the population density at the time t, R is the intrinsic rate of natural increase, and k is the carrying capacity. Since the nature has the limited resources, we consider the logistic growth model to be a more realistic one when compared to the exponential growth model. Population growth curve. So here you can observe that both the growth model are present. The first one is an exponential growth model and the second one is a logistic growth model. The y-axis represents the population density and then x-axis represents the time. So let's first discuss the first growth model, that is an exponential growth model. The exponential growth model has a J-shaped curve. And here you can even observe that the population has crossed the carrying capacity of the nature because of the unlimited supply of the resources. Whereas the logistic growth model has got an S-shaped or the sigmoid shaped curve. And here you can observe that the population ceases after a particular period of time. It is because of the limited supply of the resources and it is the carrying capacity of the nature. Life history variations. Populations, they evolved to maximize their reproductive fitness or Darwinian fitness, which is represented by R. So under a particular set of selection pressure, the organisms, they apply a strategy to reproduce very efficiently. Some organisms, they breed only once in their lifetime, like the Pacific salmon fish or the bamboo, while the others, they breed many a times in their lifetime. Example, birds and mammals. Some produce a large number of small sized offspring like oysters and pelagic fishes, whereas other organisms, they produce small number of large size offspring. Example, the birds and mammals. And these facts indicate that these characteristic features of an organisms, they have developed because of limited abiotic and biotic components which is present in the habitat. Population interactions. In nature, the animals, the plants and the microbes interact in various ways to form a biological community. Interspecific interaction arise when there is an interaction of population of two different species. So, what is interspecific interaction? Interspecific interactions are the interactions of the population between two different species. For example, interaction between the lion and the deer. There are various types of interspecific interactions. So first one is the mutualism, the second one is the competition, the third one is the parasitism, the fourth one is the predation, the fifth one is the commensalism, and the sixth one is an Commensalism. So first let's discuss what is mutualism. Mutualism is an interspecific interaction where both the species are benefited. Since both the species are benefited, we are representing it with plus sign. Competition is an interspecific interaction where both the species are harmed. Since here both the species are getting harmed, we are representing it both the species by minus sign. Parasitism is the interspecific interaction where one species, that is a parasite, is getting benefited and the other species, that is a host, is getting harmed. Therefore, the one which is getting benefited, that is a parasite, we are representing it with a plus sign, and we are representing the host as minus sign. Predation is an interspecific interaction where one species, that is the predator, is getting benefited. Therefore, we are representing it with the plus sign, and the species, other species, that is the prey, is getting harmed. Therefore, we are representing the prey with the minus sign. Commensalism is an interspecific interaction where one species is getting benefited, that is represented by plus sign, and the other species is neither getting benefited nor harmed. Since the other species is not getting benefited or it is not getting harmed, we are representing it by 0. Commensalism is an interspecific interaction where one species is harmed and the other species is unaffected. Since one species is harmed, we are representing it with minus sign, and the other species is unaffected. Therefore, we are representing it with 0. Now let's have a look at the summary of the various interspecific interaction. So the first one is the mutualism. With respect to the mutualism, both the species are benefited. With respect to the competition, both the species are harmed. Therefore, we are representing it with the minus sign. In case of predation, the predator is benefited and the prey is harmed. With respect to parasitism, the one species, that is the parasite, is benefited and the host is harmed. In case of commensalism, one species is benefited and the other species neither benefited nor harmed. In case of commensalism, one species is harmed and the other species is unaffected. In case of predation, parasitism and commensalism, the interacting species live closely together. So now first let's discuss about the predation. In a broad ecological context, all carnivores, herbivores, etc. are the predators. It includes even the insects. About 25% of all insects are phytophagous. Predation is a biological interaction where one organism, that is the predator, kills and eats the other organism, that is the prey. So let us consider an example for carnivores. Here, let lion be the predator and the deer is its prey. With respect to the herbivores, the deer is a predator and the plant is its prey. With respect to the insects which are feeding upon the plants, the insects are the predators and the plants are its prey. If a predator overexploits its prey, then the prey might become extinct. It results in the extinction of the predator. This is the reason why the predators in the nature are prudent. That means if the predator continuously overexploits the prey population, then the prey population comes down. If the population of the prey comes down gradually and if it becomes extinct, it will in turn affect the predators, because later on the predators will starve to death and then finally leading to the extinction of the predator itself. This is the reason why the predators are always thoughtful about their future and they will make sure that the prey population survives. Because if the prey population survives, it will also help for the survival of the predator. Importance of predators. So one of the significant feature of the predators are the predators keep the prey populations under control. So a stability in the prey population is maintained with the help of predators. The second one, when certain exotic species are introduced in a geographical area, they spread fast due to the absence of its natural predators in the invaded land. If we introduce any new species, that is called as an exotic species. Exotic species are those species which is of foreign origin. It is not the native species. And such species, when they are introduced into a particular geographical area, they spread very fast because of the absence of the predators. Let us consider an example, the prickly pear cactus. So this cactus was introduced in Australia in the early 1920s, and it caused havoc by rapid spreading. Finally, this cactus was brought under control only after a cactus feeding predator was introduced. The name of this cactus feeding predator was cactus moth. When the cactus moth was introduced, then it brought down the population of the prickly pear cactus, because the cactus moth fed upon the sap of the prickly pear cactus. And this method is called as biological control method. And the biological control method are based on the ability of the predator to control the prey population. Predators maintain the species diversity in a community by reducing the intensity of competition among the competing prey species. So, predators is also helping to maintain the overall diversity in a community. Let us consider an example of the starfish. The name of the starfish is Pisaster. Pisaster is a starfish. It is a predator in a rocky intertidal communities of the American Pacific coast. So they conducted an experiment in which all the Pisasters were removed from an enclosed intertidal area. And after a particular period of time, that is within a span of 1 year, they noticed that more than 10 species of invertebrates became extinct due to the interspecific competition. So here we can represent the starfish, the Pisaster, as a keystone species. So what is a keystone species? Keystone species is a dominant predator whose removal allows the prey population to explode and decreases the overall diversity. So therefore, the Pisaster, which is a keystone species, was a very important species. So when the Pisaster was removed from the community, then the prey population exploded, the population increased, and as a result of which there was a lot of instability leading to the decrease of more than 10 species of invertebrates. Defenses of the prey species to lessen the impact of predation. That means, what are the defense mechanisms the prey species has got in order to protect itself from the predators? First one, some insects and the frogs are camouflage. That is, they are cryptically colored to avoid being detected by the predator. What do you mean by cryptically colored? Cryptically colored means it is a defense mechanism the organism has got in order to disguise their appearance. It usually blends in with their surrounding. The second feature is some species of the prey are poisonous in nature. For example, the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly is highly distasteful to the predators because it has got the special chemical in its body. The chemical which is present in the body of the monarch butterfly is the cardiac glycoside. This cardiac glycoside is mainly accumulated in their wings and in their abdomen region. This chemical is acquired when the monarch butterfly was in their caterpillar stage, when it was feeding on the poisonous weed. The next defense mechanism is the presence of the thorns in case of plants. The thorns are present in certain species of plants like acacia and in the cactus, which keeps them away from the predators. Certain species of plants produce chemicals, and these chemicals makes the herbivore sick. It might inhibit their feeding process or their digestion process, or even affect their reproductive process, or might even kill them. For example, the Calotropis plant. Calotropis is a weed which is found growing in abandoned fields. Calotropis, they produce a highly poisonous substance called as cardiac glycosides. Therefore, cattle or goats do not eat it. Apart from these chemicals, there are many other chemicals which are present in the body of the plants, such as nicotine and caffeine. Quinine, strychnine, opium, etc. are the defenses against the grazers and browsers. Grazers are those animals which grazes upon the grasses. Browsers are those animals which feeds upon the small woody plants, shrubs, herbs, etc. So the second one is the competition. Competition is an interspecific interaction which happens between the two different species. So this interspecific competition is a potent force in organic evolution. Competition is a process in which the fitness of one species, which is measured as R value, is significantly lower in the presence of another species. So when the competition occurs between the two species, one species will not have enough resources like food, which affects their physical health as well as their reproductive fitness also. Competition occurs between the closely related species as well. They compete for the same limited resources. Even the unrelated species also compete for the resource. For example, flamingos and the fishes, they compete for the zooplankton. Competition also occurs even when the resources are abundant. For example, in interference competition, the feeding efficiency of one species is reduced due to the interfering and the inhibitory presence of another species, even when the resources are abundant. So, in spite of having an abundant resources, the two species compete. It is because one species wants to dominate upon the other. Evidences for the competition. The Abington tortoise in Galapagos Island became extinct within a decade after the goats were introduced on the island due to the greater browsing efficiency of the goat. So in Galapagos Island, where the Abington tortoise were living, there the goats were introduced. So once the goats were introduced in this Galapagos Island, they noticed that after 10 years that the population of the Abington tortoise came down. It is because of the competition with the goats. Goats had a greater browsing efficiency. That means to say goats are the browsers. Browsers are those animals which feeds upon the herbs, shrubs or any small dicot plants. So because the goats were voracious eater, the Abington tortoise had to face the shortage of the resources, as a result of which the population of the Abington tortoise came down. Competitive release. A species restricted to a small geographical area expands its distributional range when a competing species is experimentally removed. That means to say, a species which was present in a very small geographical area, it increases its population when the competing species is removed from that particular area. Let us consider an example. The Connell's field experiment showed that on the rocky sea coast of the Scotland, the larger and then competitively superior barnacle Balanus dominates the intertidal area and excludes the smaller barnacle Cathamalus from that zone. So, if you observe this diagram, Balanus and the Cathamalus are the marine arthropods. Balanus is a superior barnacle. So, this has occupied a larger geographical area and this is a competing species. So, once when they removed the Balanus from this particular area, they noticed that the population of the Cathamalus increased in its number. This is called as competitive release. Gauss competitive exclusion principle. It states that two closely related species competing for the same resources cannot coexist indefinitely and the competitively inferior one will be eliminated eventually. This may be true in limited resources but not otherwise. First, let's consider an example. So, the Russian biologist G.F. Gauss cultured two different species of Paramecia. So he cultured Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum in a separate cultures, and he then noticed that the population size of the aurelia and the population size of the caudatum was maxima. Then he mixed these two species of Paramecium and then he cultured in a same culture plate. And then he noticed that the population size of the Paramecium aurelia increased, whereas the population of the Paramecium caudatum, it decreased. It is because they are the two closely related species which is competing for the same resource, but they cannot coexist indefinitely because the competitively superior one will dominate. So the Paramecium aurelia is the dominant one, whereas the Paramecium caudatum is an inferior one which was eliminated eventually. And this principle is applicable only when there is a limited resource. When there is an unlimited resources, this principle does not apply. Species facing the competition may evolve the mechanism that promotes coexistence rather than exclusion. Example is the resource partitioning. So certain species, they wanted to avoid the competition. So they will evolve a mechanism which promote coexistence, which is much better than getting excluded. For example, it is resource partitioning. Resource partitioning is if the two species compete for the same resources, they avoid the competition by choosing the different times for feeding or different foraging patterns. For example, Mark Arthur showed that 5 closely related species of warblers living on the same tree were able to avoid the competition and coexist due to behavioral differences in their foraging activity. So Mark Arthur is the name of the scientist, and he showed that there were 5 closely related species of warblers, and these all 5 warblers occupied the same tree. But each warbler occupied the different parts of the tree. For example, this warbler occupied the topmost position of the tree. The second warbler, it occupied the next position of the tree. The other warbler occupied the middle part of the tree, and some other warblers, they occupied the side part of the tree. So in this way, different warblers occupied the different parts of the tree. Along with that, their foraging activity was also different. The time of foraging was also different, and also the nesting time was also different for each of these species. In this way, these warblers avoided the competition and they tried to coexist living in the same tree. So the third interspecific interaction which we are going to study is the parasitism. Many parasites have evolved to be host specific in such a way that both host and parasite tend to co-evolve. Co-evolve means evolving together. If the host evolves a special mechanism for rejecting the parasite, then the parasite also evolves the mechanism to counteract it and neutralize them in order to be successful with the same host species. The next one, what are the adaptations the parasite have got? The first one is the loss of sense organ, presence of adhesive organs or the suckers to cling on to the host body, loss of digestive system, and the high reproductive capacity. The life cycle of the parasite is very complex. For example, the human liver fluke, it has got 2 intermediate hosts. The first one is the snail and the second one is the fish in order to complete its life cycle. Whereas the malarial parasite, they need the mosquito to spread to the other hosts. Majority of the parasite, they harm the host. They may reduce the survival rate of the host, they affect their population density, the population growth, and even the reproductive potential of the host. Finally, they even make the host physically very weak. The types of parasites. The first one is an ectoparasites. Parasite that feeds on an external surface of a host organism is called as ectoparasite. For example, the lice which is present on the human head and the ticks which is present on the body of the dog. Even the marine fishes are infested with an ectoparasitic copypods. copypods means crustaceans. Cuscuta is a parasitic plant that is commonly found growing on hedge plants. Hedge plants are those which are closely placed shrubs or trees which helps to form a barrier in a particular area. So during the course of evolution, the Cuscuta has lost its ability to develop the chlorophyll and the leaves. It derives the nutrition from the body of the host plant with the help of hostoria. So, hostoria is an appendage which is present in the body of Cuscuta to draw the nutrition from the body of the other plants. The next one is about the female mosquito. The female mosquito is not considered as a parasite because it needs the blood only for the purpose of reproduction. So, the female mosquito needs the blood only for the development of its egg. The female mosquito feeds on the plant sap for its nutrition. Therefore, we do not consider female mosquito as a parasite. Endoparasites. The parasites that live inside the body of the host at different organs such as the liver, kidney, lungs, RBC, etc. The life cycle of the endoparasites are very complex. Their morphological and anatomical features are very simple when compared to their reproductive organ, which is highly developed. Brood parasitism in birds. Here the parasitic birds, they lay the eggs in the nest of its host and it will allow the host to incubate them. During the course of evolution, the eggs of the parasitic bird have evolved to resemble to that of host egg with respect to its size and its color, thereby reducing its chances of being detected and ejected from the host. For example, the brood parasitism between the cuckoo and the crow. So the fourth interspecific interaction which we are going to study is commensalism. Commensalism is an association between two organisms in which one benefits and the other one is neither benefited nor harmed. For example, orchid which is growing as an epiphyte on a mango branch. So the orchid plant which is growing on a mango plant. So what is the meaning of an epiphyte? Epiphyte is a plant that grow on another plant and they derive the moisture and the nutrition from the air and the rain. Since it is deriving the nutrition and the moisture from the air and the other sources, it will not affect the mango plant. The orchid is simply dependent upon the mango plant for the support. The second one is the barnacles which is growing on the back of the whale. Barnacles are the marine crustaceans with an external shell. And these barnacles which is present on the back of the whale, it will not harm the whale. It is dependent upon the whale only for the free transportation. So during the process of transportation, it will even get the food. So in this way, the barnacle is getting benefited while the whale is not getting any benefit nor it is harmed. The third one is the cattle egret and the grazing cattle. The cattle egrets are the one which is always present near the livestock. Egrets are the white birds with long legs. And these cattle egrets, they forage close to the place where cattle are grazing. So when the cattle move, there will be a disturbance in vegetation. As a result of which, the insects which is present inside the vegetation, they come out. And during this process, the egrets feeds on these insects. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for the egrets to find and catch the insects. Here, the egret is getting benefited, whereas the cattle is not getting any benefit, nor it is getting harmed. The fourth one is the sea anemone and the clownfish. The fish, it gets the protection from the predators with the help of the stinging cells of the sea anemone. But the sea anemone will not get any benefit or it will not be harmed. So the fifth type of interspecific interaction what we are going to study is mutualism. Mutualism is an interaction between the two species in which both the species involved are benefited. For example, lichen. Lichen is an intimate mutualistic relationship between the fungus and the algae. The algae prepares the food and give it to the fungus, whereas the fungus provides the shelter to the algae and it even absorbs the water and nutrition. The second example is mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae is an association between the fungi and the roots of higher plants. The fungi helps the plant in absorbing the essential nutrients from the soil, while the plants provide the food for the fungi. Mutualism between the plant and animal through pollination and seed dispersion. So the first example is fig trees and wasp. The fig species, it is pollinated only by a certain species of wasp called as fig wasp, and there are no other species which pollinate this fig species. The female wasp, it pollinates the fig inflorescence when it is searching for a suitable egg-laying site inside the fruit. The fig, in turn, it helps the wasp by providing the shelter and the food for the developing larvae. And the second example is that of orchids. To ensure the pollination takes place, the orchid shows a diversity of the floral patterns, thereby attracting the important pollinator insects like the bees and bumblebees. The orchids, in turn, reward the bees and bumblebees with the nectar. But not all orchids offer this reward. The third example is sexual deceit of Ophrys, the Mediterranean orchid. One petal of its flower, it resembles the female bee in its size, color and markings. Therefore, the male bee confuses it with the female bee and pseudocopulates with the flower. The bee is dusted with the pollen from the flower. When the same bee is pseudocopulating with another flower, it transfers the pollen into it. If the female bee's color pattern changes during the course of evolution, the pollination success rate will be reduced. It is because the color pattern of the petal will not match with the color pattern of the female bee. Therefore, the orchid flower has to co-evolve in order to maintain the resemblance of its petal to the female bee.